Yeah, we just got back from quite an ordeal in Montana. We go down there to hunt deer and elk. We'll pack in 4 miles. And when I say pack in, it's mostly dragging our gear in sleds. It was particularly snowy. We went back out for one more load of food right as the snowstorm was rolling in, and everybody was leaving. We contemplated just getting the heck out of there. We decided to ride it out, but we were still kind of stressing out about what it was going to take to get out. The snow is dry and deep enough that we were more plowing than we were sledding, so it took a lot longer and burned a lot more calories in the process. And we're tired and it's cold. 2.5, 3 hours later, we got back up to camp. No, it's just a day in the life of backcountry hunting. There's something very unique about that experience I haven't really found anywhere else.
We are live. Bruce, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Robert. Thank you.
Glad to have you back, man. It's
yeah,
things are good here. When was the last time you were on the show? It's been over a year now, right?
I think so, yeah. It was maybe 1.5 or 2 years ago.
Yeah, we've had a couple hunting seasons since then, man.
Indeed. We just got back from quite an ordeal in Montana.
Well, tell me about it, man. What were you hunting?
Well, we were elk hunting. When we go down there to hunt deer and elk, we'll do a little deer hunting to prepare and get ready for the main event, which is the elk hunt. And typically we'll pack in about 4 miles into the backcountry. We'll drive a couple hours from the nearest small town back into the trailheads, and from there, at the end of the road, we'll pack in 4 miles. And when I say pack in, it's mostly dragging our gear in sleds as long as there's snow. Now, on some years when it's been dry, we've had to actually pack on our backs, but we're not using horses, although we would like to be using horses sometimes.
Very cool.
But yeah, it was particularly snowy, and there was a little extra snow than usual. 2 years ago, we went in there and we couldn't even get to the trailhead. There was so much snow, and opening weekend of the season, they had this huge dump and people were stuck at the trailhead, and they had to hire heavy equipment to plow out the road because the last 3 or 4 miles are very unmaintained and hard to get access to. And so we went in there this year, and there's a decent amount of snow. There are quite a few people at the trailhead hunting from the trailhead. And we spent a few days getting our camp in, our tent set up, some loads of food. We went back out for one more load of food right as the snowstorm was rolling in, and everybody was leaving because they didn't want to repeat what happened 2 years ago, which was getting stuck there basically. And we were kind of, it was a little bit too late for us. We contemplated just getting the heck out of there and leaving our tent and everything, and before the snow got too bad, because it can snow a lot and then it can blow and drift, and pretty soon the roads are buried in feet of snow. But we decided to ride it out, and obviously we got out. I'm sitting here today, but the benefit of it is that we were in this 30 plus square mile basin hunting, and we had it all to ourselves. There are 3 of us, and that's, it was nice because the elk weren't pressured. We were seeing more animals, but we were still kind of stressing out about what it was going to take to get out from the trailhead. And one of my hunting partners had an old ankle injury that was acting up, so he was having a hard time getting around in the deep snow. And long story short, we decided to, as soon as the storm broke, I was going to go out and hunt and see if I could get a quick opportunity. And I hiked up on the ridge and looked around, and the sun was breaking, fresh snow everywhere, trees are covered, and I see a couple bunches of elk. The closest one was back down, kind of where we started, up the other side of the drainage, and it was in the afternoon. I looked at my clock, my watch, and figured I had enough time to get over there. I knew the terrain, took some calculated guesses on the wind and what was going on and what these elk were going to do. they're probably a mile and a half away from us at that point. When I say us, there's three of us up there. The third guy was a friend of mine who was just getting into hunting. He wasn't hunting, but he was carrying a camera, and he'd actually recorded a bunch of this. And we can share that video later. But we made a move. We got down, crossed over, went up the other side, back into the timber, downwind, hoping the wind didn't shift. And sometimes, you look across a valley at something and it makes perfect sense, and you get down and go up the other side, and it's a very different perspective. So you got to really, some guesswork there. But we hit it just right, and we came out to the timber and around the edge here, and I started seeing, elk rumps. They had gotten out and feeding at the end of the day, and was able to sneak in there and get a nice shot on a young bull. And then the work began. It was right at the end of the day, and it was getting cold fast.
Was it dark by the time you all got up on it, or was it still pretty light?
Well, it was the last half hour of daylight when we shot it.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it was getting dark pretty fast. And we got it right there. And then we dragged it down through the timber. It was real steep, where I thought there was an old trail down below. And I went down and eventually found it. So we drug it down a couple hundred yards, and pretty steep, because you can't just drag an elk on level, deep snow very easily. And skinned it, broke it down, got the forelegs off, all the loose meat out into a game bag, hung the forelegs up in a tree, and the loose meat over under the tree with some branches, and left I think I left the handkerchief, and maybe we peed around the perimeter just to put our scent there, and then hightailed it back to camp in the moonlight. And it was probably single digits at this point, and had a good sleep. And we got up the next morning and took empty sleds up there and loaded the elk parts that were just rock solid. I mean, they were solid frozen. Even the big, hams, the hind quarters were just solid. And it was about 2 miles from camp up further. We loaded that up, came back out, stopped at camp briefly to have a quick brunch snack, and then continued on down the trail. And the snow is dry and deep enough that we were more plowing than we were sledding. So it took a lot longer and burned a lot more calories in the process. And we were hoping to get down there well before dark, but it was well after dark, just with the slow going, 4 miles down, slightly downhill with a few uphills. And we're tired, and it's cold, and we clamber into one of the trucks from the passenger side, because the driver's side is frozen solid, and convince the engine to turn over. Luckily it did. And we're just eating as much food as we can, a little heat coming through the firewall, kind of started to relax a little bit, but it was looking at the clock, it's 7:45. And I look at Andrew and I say, we got to leave at 8:00. And I could tell, look in his eye, he's like half acknowledging that and half searching for alternatives to the punishing slog ahead, which was 4 miles back uphill in the dark and the snow and the cold. And 8:00 rolled around. I shut the engine off and looked at him and nodded, and we knew what we had to do. And we just sort of got in this trance-like hike, through the darkness, and headlights once in a while, and some moonlight. And 2.5, 3 hours later, we got back up to camp, where our third party, a third member it kept the fire going and had dinner saved for us, and had a little leftover dinner and celebration, and got some well-deserved sleep. But it's just a day in the life of backcountry hunting, and that was one day of several days, and it's a lot of it's like that, and we can talk about this more, but there's something very unique about that experience that I haven't really found anywhere else.
You're lucky if you shoot a game early in the day, you get the whole days ahead of you. But when you've got something coming to the crosshairs right there at last light, and you had to like ask yourself if you're prepared for what's about to commence, because if you put that animal on the ground, even if you don't, you got to hike out to it, look for blood, all that good stuff. So if you pull the trigger, at dusk, you're just gearing up for several more hours before you can lay your head down that night, and it can be brutal for sure.
Yeah. And the hard part is, the last hour of daylight is often real productive.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're not getting up early enough to get out there into the field for that first hour, which can also be pretty productive. So I've shot a lot of animals at the closing bell, and and I've by myself in the past too. I've field dressed and broken down elk and got them hung in a tree barely. All the time kind of looking over my shoulder, making sure a cougar or a wolf pack isn't prowling in the distance. But sometimes, you're out there, and, one year we were out there and it was slow, and it was like day 10 of about a 2-week trip, and we hadn't seen elk close enough to get a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally spotted some, and they were quite a ways up there, but I had a couple hours of daylight left. I said, I think I can make this. And same thing happened, went down and up and got up into there and dropped my pack and everything excess I didn't need it. I think I left my binoculars so I could get down low and creep, because I started seeing elk through the timber, and I got up over a little rise and I saw one there 50 yards away feeding. I was able to get a good shot, but again, right at the closing bell, they come out to feed at night, and then it's a 2 or 3 hour ordeal.
And I'm always lucky in that mine always come out in the evening, so I never see anything in the morning, first light. But I mean, that elk I killed last year, we shot him, I think it was like 5 or 6 p.m. By the time we got to him and started quartering him, it was, by the time we finished quartering him, it was like 10 p.m. because it took us forever to get to him. And then we had that mountain lion breathing down our neck. So we left for camp. We didn't get back to camp until 2 a.m. And that's way past my bedtime.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
so they had a mountain lion prowling around, huh?
Yeah. So he was, I think I may have told you that on the phone. I don't remember. But yeah, we'd shot the bull. We got to him. We, field dressed him and, hung the quarters in a tree. And I was trying to carry the head back. And we had like the organs and everything with us as well. But I bumped my walkie-talkie and it went off. And then as soon as I bumped that and the sound went off, the mountain lion growled probably about 20 yards away from us. So we couldn't see him because it was pitch black at that point. We just heard it. And then, we packed everything up. I stashed the head in a tree, covered it up with some limbs, and we made it back to camp. Then we got back the next morning, and the mountain lion had found the head, drug it about 100 yards, and eaten out the eyes and the tongue. So it was definitely a mountain lion. But yeah, that was didn't want to get too cozy with him that night.
Yeah, no kidding. I've seen a few cats out there, but they usually keep their distance, but you never know if they're hungry.
Mm-hmm.
It's cold and they're hungry. They've got the upper advantage.
They do.
The upper hand in those situations.
Yeah, and I'm in Arkansas, so I don't have any predatory animals like that out where I'm at that I would have to worry about. But when you're up in the Northwest region, Montana, Colorado, Washington, Wyoming, you're not the biggest thing on the food chain anymore. So you got to kind of have that heightened degree of alertness about you for sure.
Right. Luckily, the brown bears are mostly asleep in the later season. This was late November, but not always, and especially in the archery season, they're out and about. But if they've got a little bit of hunting pressure on them, that can help.
Mm-hmm.
It's just always something to be aware of. And
was this the first time that other guy that was with you had experienced anything like that? The cameraman, had he ever been hunting before?
He hadn't, and I told him on the way in. Before the trip, I said, "Hey, listen, this is going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a hell of an experience, but somewhere as we get into it, you're going to think, oh, what the hell did I sign up for? This is crazy." And partway through, you say, "I'm never going to do this again. This is stupid." By the time you get out, you're just going to be thinking about planning the next trip, and that's essentially what happened. Exactly what happened. And it's just something. It's an experience you can't. It's always with you. They're I'm sure there are lots of experiences like that. I climbed Mount Rainier, which isn't that technical, but there are much bigger peaks, and that's a serious endeavor and achievement if you can get up to a really high peak in adverse conditions. And I think there's some similar experiences to be had there. And I think there's something unique about hunting in that it draws out this kind of primal sense in us to pay attention to what the wind is doing and what we're smelling and seeing and sensing. And it really draws out our senses and our intuition more, I think, or maybe to a different level.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely strenuous. Like when I'm hunting in Arkansas, it's typically out of a deer stand, which is not too tough. But you go up in the Northwest region and you're hiking several miles in, you get something on the ground, you got to backpack it several miles out. It's all at elevation. I mean, it's a similar feeling to what I experience when I'm in a bodybuilding prep or when I'm doing like a 50-mile march. Like there's a definite point when you're typically, right before the halfway point, right after, where you're not quite close enough to see the finish line, and you're second guessing every decision you've made it to that point. You're like, what am I doing this for? I feel terrible. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm wet. I'm miserable. I'm exhausted. My feet hurt. But man, when it's all said and done, you look back on it and you've got something to actually point to and be proud of. And I feel like so many people don't experience that. So finding outlets for that in life, especially in our current society, is crucial. I feel like we all need that, especially as men. I feel like we have to have that adversity that we subject ourselves to and come out on top from.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like after you go through an experience like that, you can always kind of tap back into it, remember it. And, you do it a few more times and it starts to be a little more concrete. And that kind of gets to the question, like, why hunt? If the objective is to feed ourselves, why not just go to the grocery store and buy the premium red meat, or go to the farmer's market and get something local, or better yet, meet the farmer, or maybe even start farming and raising your own. And it's each step, is kind of getting back to a deeper connection with our food. And I feel like the ultimate, the final step is the hunt. And there's so much to say about this. I don't even know where to start, but from the fact of food waste alone, when I researched this a few years ago, there was I think 270 pounds of meat and fish produced on average per adult in the US. And of that, 70 pounds was wasted.
Yeah.
Which is quite a bit. It's like 2 lambs, or, we get about a little over 200 pounds of pure meat off of an elk typically. So that's about a third of a share of an elk wasted.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that when you go to that effort to get out there and hunt and put all the work into, taking care of that meat, packing it out, keeping it clean, processing it, getting it in the freezer, and you pull a piece out and eat it. You remember that story, you share the story, you share it with other people. And, when I'm done with that meal, there's not an ounce left and wasted, because I would just be wasting my time and the life energy of that animal. So having that direct connection, I think, is very critical. And I think there's parts of that available. If you're raising and slaughtering an animal, you see that life death cycle. But again, the hunt, interacting with a wild animal is about as far as you can get back into being wild, rather than having an experience with a domesticated or tame animal.
Yeah, food waste is one of my biggest frustrations with the world we live in. Like I do not throw away food. If I don't eat it, my son doesn't eat it, my dog eats it. It doesn't get wasted. Like I just don't throw away food. So I don't cope well with people that I see just massive waste. Like it doesn't sit well with me. And I do think, bridging that gap of the life cycle is very important. Like, especially if you eat meat, which I would recommend everyone do. But if you eat meat, it makes sense in my mind to be as connected with that animal and understand and appreciate and respect where it came from as humanly possible. And as you mentioned, knowing your local farmer is better than just going to a local, big box grocery store. Raising the animal yourself is better than that. But hunting it in its turf, where it has the highest likelihood of winning, so to speak, is the highest degree of respect and appreciation. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I had elk from my hunt thawed out last night for dinner, and I went as far as to like shake that bag as much as I could to get every drop of blood out of it. Like, I don't want a single ounce to go to waste because I put in so much work to get it. And then when you kill, you have this greater degree of respect for the animal. I mean, there's certainly bad hunters out there that don't view it that way, but hunting gets a bad rep from the ignorant because they just assume that there's no respect, where it's really the exact opposite. Like, all the hunters that I know have a higher degree of respect for that wildlife, that animal, than any of the non-hunters I know. So I think it just fully completes that life cycle circle.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When you step out into the backcountry and leave the comforts of the modern world and kind of tap into something primal, awaken those senses, and you're going out there with the intention of killing something to eat it, even if you don't kill something, I feel like that experience alone leaves you a different person.
Yeah. It's funny because, we tell our wives, hey, we're going to save money by, getting into hunting. We're going to be self-sufficient. But when you tally up the cost of a good rifle, your hunting gear, your binoculars, all this stuff, you're certainly not coming out ahead financially. Like, you would likely save much more money in going to the grocery store, but you can't, tap into that innate primal sense by going to that grocery store. And I feel like the benefit of that is far and above anything you'd ever be able to get otherwise. We're all primal beings to some extent. Like, we have this in our DNA. Like, we, as a species, evolved eating primarily animal fats and proteins, sharing a campfire with fellow hunters, having that sense of camaraderie after a hunt, whether it was successful or not, that hardship. And we all crave that to some extent. But actually returning to the act of hunting, I think, is one of the most, tangible ways to reintroduce that into our being.
Yeah, and you reminded me of a couple of things. One is a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass. Have you heard of this? Robin Wall Kimmerer. Anyway, it's an interesting book. She's, it's sort of bridging the gap between science and native wisdom. And she talks about a story about, kind of a belief story they have in the way that the geese come back and feed them. But it kind of goes into this idea, like, when you don't realize, you don't feel the warmth of the feathers in your hand and realize a life has been given for your own, there's not as much appreciation, and something comes wrapped in slippery plastic on styrofoam. It might fill the belly, but leave the spirit empty, she says. And it kind of gets right to the point of, like, yeah, we can put whatever we have available to us into our gut, but there's a lot more to it, I think, than that.
Yeah. And just from a technical standpoint, like, so many people go to the grocery store and they gravitate toward the choice cuts, like the ribeye steaks or just the ground beef, for instance. But like, when you harvest an animal and you have that entire animal in front of you and you're trying to make use of every morsel of it that you can, you find ways to appreciate, respect, and, cook and prepare the less desirable, quote unquote, cuts, like the shanks, the liver, the heart, the tongue, all these parts that are absolutely delicious when you figure out how to cook them. But the cuts that so many people never experience or let go to waste. I mean, I know so many hunters that just throw away the shanks because on the white-tailed deer, they're not that big. They're tough, but I mean, if you put those in a slow cooker and do like an osso buco style with them, I mean, they're probably one of my favorite cuts. But you just have this newfound appreciation for every part of the animal that would be much harder to harness if you didn't hunt.
Yeah. And that's a good point too. I've experienced, unfortunately, similar situations where I've come across animals that other hunters have shot and they've just taken the back straps and the hind legs in a hurry, and I'm not saying that hunting makes us responsible and respectful. I think there's a wide array of hunters out there, just like there is a wide spectrum of humans on the planet, and if, it requires that level of connection and respect, I think, going into it and or some guidance in approaching it that way, because hunting is a complicated topic and it gets a bad rap because there are people out there that are doing stupid things, and being disrespectful. And I think it's, and it can be confusing because it's been extracted from our society so much that then sometimes people get back into it and say, oh, this is really tapping into something, and they want to do stuff and shoot stuff and then show it off. And that's bad. It's not bad to celebrate that. But there's a fine line between kind of being too much, showing off too much, and just kind of being subtle and humble about the process. And like I said before, I've had very deep experiences being out there and not shooting anything, maybe having an opportunity to shoot something in passing because it didn't feel right or whatever, or working hard to get a shot and just never getting to that point, but remembering that experience. And I think it's important that we, as hunters, continue to think about that and, talk about that aspect of it. Like how can we give hunting a new name? This is not about going out there and conquering nature and slaughtering the beast and hanging it on the wall. It's about going out and reconnecting to the land and the energies out there, the energies that have been, supporting humankind and our ancestors for some 2 million years, they think. And I'm really tapping into that and being part of that. And to me, that feels like I'm part of something bigger, like this bigger unknown, nature and the natural ecosystem. And, however big of spirit you want to draw there, it's just, there are questions that I don't think we're ever going to answer about what's going on out there. But I think, I feel like there's something very magical about being in nature and being connected to it. And hunting a wild animal, to me, is sort of the highest level of connection.
Yeah.
I think some people say, and getting back to how it's complicated, even today, I get ridiculed in little comments online, like, only stupid people hunt. But it's not, it's worse words than that. And why would you want to hunt when you can go out and experience nature just by looking at it? And so it's complicated. I do also enjoy connecting with nature by observing it. And most of the year I'm watching nature, but then there's hunting season and we have to eat. So it's just, it's complex, it's complicated, but kind of getting back to, the why and thinking about, really what the experience is that we're having and the image that we're portraying, because it's hard to say what's going to happen with a lot of things, including hunting.
Yeah.
Although Leopold, one last thing. Aldo Leopold talks about this idea of the first sign of intelligent tinkering is that you don't just pull a piece out and throw it away. if you don't understand it. The whole, if the whole is good, the pieces that make up the whole must contribute to that goodness. And I feel like hunting is a piece that's been pulled out, whether it's 100 years ago or 500 or 1,000 or 5 to 10,000 when agriculture cropped up. Still a short period of time, but it's been pulled out and almost thrown away. And if that happens, what are we losing that might be essential to our connection to the land and to our food and the life and death circles, and maybe a gift that we have been receiving. So it's I think there's a risk if we turn away from hunting and go totally towards manufacturing our food, and that we lose a certain part of who we are as human and how we're connected to the earth.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I feel like hunting is very humbling, and I feel like we need to have that humility as a species. Like, we are the humans that are at the top of the food chain, so to speak, but you have to approach that level of responsibility with a certain degree of humility and respect and appreciation. And I think when you're out there in the elements, going after an elk in the mountains, and you're cold, you're wet, you're tired, you're miserable, and you recognize that these animals that you're after, that's just their norm. That's what they do day in, day out, every second of their life. Like, that is just what they're familiar with and comfortable with. Like, that's their comfort zone. And I feel like as soon as you make that connection, you recognize that while we may be on the top of the food chain, so to speak, we have lost a certain degree of that just primitive self-sufficiency in the elements. And I feel like hunting bridges that gap and creates that humility. And if you have that humility as a person, you are much more inclined to have that respect toward the animal. And for me, I want to be as self-sufficient as possible. I want to be able to, respectfully harvest that animal and let it nourish my family's life, but always with this significant undertone of respect and appreciation and admiration for the wild, for the animal, for the environment from which they came. And I think that makes us better. Like, it makes us better towards one another. There's just this kindred spirit shared amongst people that hunt with that outlook. And like, you can't read that in a book and experience it. You can't, learn about it or watch it on a YouTube channel. You have to live it. And I mean, when you look at where the hunting dollars go, like when you look at the cost of conservation and where these hunting license, income revenue is spent, like, hunters do so much to preserve that wild, primitive, natural habitat. So I think that, there's certainly a lot of debate as to what good is hunting and, arguments against it. But when I hear the arguments, it's very clear that the people that are making those are coming from just a complete lack of understanding towards the sport, towards the life, and honestly just ignorance towards it. So having people portray the right messaging, having that become more widespread and well-known is, I think, absolutely key.
Yeah, exactly. And, we talk about the dollars of hunting. That you're right. A lot of it, licenses and taxes on equipment, go to conservation. And the other aspect of the dollars in hunting, I think a lot of the money in hunting is in guided experiences. And there can be, there's an experience there. And I think sometimes it's a narrow experience of doing it yourself. And I think there's a distinction to be made there of, anyone with $5 to $50,000 can hire someone to take them out where the animals are, get them into position, and help them shoot something, and then likely do a lot of the work and dressing and breaking down the animal and getting it back to camp with horses. And that's a heck of an experience. And I would argue that it's a very narrow bandwidth of what we're talking about here in terms of like a do it do-it-yourself approach and in the backcountry hunt. There are also road hunters that maybe for whatever reason they're disabled and they can't get out of a car, but there's probably a lot of lazy people that are just driving the roads looking for opportunities. And so again, a wide spectrum of hunting. But when you take the time to plan a trip, prepare, figure out, get your equipment in order, practice things like shooting your rifle or your bow, making sure you have the right tools and you know how to use them so that you go into the backcountry, you feel confident that whatever happens, you can deal with it, and then you deal with it. And it's a lot of work. And that's, a very narrow sliver of that 1 or 2 weeks in the backcountry is killing the animal. And there's all this planning and prep that goes into it. And then all this work after the shot that goes into getting it done. And that's all part of the experience, I think.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I kind of liken everything to bodybuilding because I'm a bodybuilder, but I prep for a competition for 6 months and I'm on stage for 2 minutes. That's not too dissimilar from hunting. You pull the trigger and that moment takes a second, but all that goes into the prep work, all that comes in afterwards, like that's where the memories are made. That's where the journey begins. And that's what it's all about. Like the actual act of pulling a trigger and spilling that blood and taking that life, while important and significant, is certainly not the experience in its totality. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah. And I can't emphasize enough, the preparation for that, not only the gear and the, knowing how to use it, but the most important piece of gear is our body, our physical condition. And I've gone into hunts with, I used to be a civil structural engineer working downtown in a high rise, and I'd work right up to a hunting trip and then blast off to go hunting from sea level in Seattle to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 feet in the Rockies. And there's a serious boot camp feel there for 2 or 3 or 4 days or more, like acclimating and getting used to it. And that can eat into quite a bit of your hunt. Mm-hmm. But if you take the time to prepare prior to arriving, you kind of hit the ground running, and can do a lot more. You go a lot further, feel a lot better, and just accomplish a lot more.
Yeah. I feel like, especially with the backcountry hunting component, you have to be in good physical shape in order to be the best version of yourself, to place a well-placed shot on that animal and just show the animal that the respect it deserves. Like if you're out of shape and you've got to hike up 2 miles at elevation and you're gasping for air and you're shaking, then you're running the risk of putting a poor shot on that animal. And no one wins in that situation. So treating all of this with the level of detail and attention that it deserves is key. And I feel like when you're hunting in that format, you are a better hunter if you are fit for the task of hunting. So yeah, you can't really separate those two. They go hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me, I've shot 2, maybe 3 elk with bullet wounds. Sometimes the bullet was still in the elk and healed over. One bull had a hole right through both rounds, like the hamstrings. It healed, the hide had healed, but when I processed it, I could stick my finger through the muscles.
Wow.
It's all, there's a hole, but then scar tissue around it. And this last year, I shot an elk with a broadhead right in the brisket inside and healed over, and it sort of like scar tissue around it. So, not only are they tough animals to survive that, but to your point, if you're not doing it right, there's this margin of error, on a kill zone in the heart and lungs. It might be, it's 8 inches for a deer, maybe 12 inches for an elk. So it's not like got to be right on, but still there's a lot that can go wrong. And you want every advantage you can to be over prepared. Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of things can happen that throws things off. But yeah, getting back to the physical conditioning, there's no excuse for not having. I mean, there's no alternative, or there's really, you can't make up for. I guess you can if you have horses and you hire a guide, but if you're out there, doing it yourself, I think the bottom line is you're just going to feel better and perform better if you're in better shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to hunting and all that we've kind of, introduced here, so much of it takes time. It takes experience to some degree. It takes knowledge, takes the ability to learn and having a student mentality. And I feel very fortunate because I grew up in a family, in a house where my dad's a biologist. We have a family farm that I've had access to forever. It's been in our family for 4 generations. So I've always had a location and, older, wiser men in my family that could teach me these skills from an early age. That is not the norm. That is not common. That is not often the case. And people maybe listen to this podcast want to get into it. They want to get involved. And I just try and be sympathetic to them. And if I didn't have the resources that I do, I honestly would not even know where to start. I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know how to learn about optics. There'd be so much that I didn't know. And that can be incredibly daunting for people that want to pursue this and don't know where to start. And you've done something incredibly unique in that you've crafted courses and resources for people to dive into this realm, dive into this world without any of that prior experience. So I think you're doing a huge service to humanity by making that available to people.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a funny world. I think a lot of hunters think that, well, we don't really want to welcome a lot of people into the sport because it would be more competition for a dwindling resource, which is one viewpoint, and it's true to a degree if all other things are equal. But on the other hand, if we're acknowledging the fact that wildlife, the health of our wildlife populations and habitat, more importantly, hinges on our connection to it and our attention and care for it, which is, I think, in a lot of times why the numbers comes from hunting, then more hunters would then equate to more care for the resource and a desire to see it continue on. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but and a lot of people have their favorite spots, so it doesn't make sense to say take all their friends into their place where they spent years finding. So that can be tricky too. But I do think it's a benefit to ourselves and society if we can kind of get back into hunting, which has been steadily declining for the last 2 generations or more, and put more care and thought into it. And so that's, in part why I started 10 years ago now, why I started Human Nature Hunting, I wanted to give people the opportunity to experience what I was experiencing out on those backcountry trips. And it wasn't just me taking them out there and showing them necessarily what to do. I felt like the whole experience kind of you had to be in the driver's seat. So we went back a step and said, okay, we're going to teach people how to shoot, the best practices for shooting rifles and bows and how to work up into those and, establish good habits and how to deal with an animal when it's on the ground, how to field dress it, skin it, break it down completely, even butcher it like we do with all of our deer and elk. How to track and look for sign and how to move through the landscape cautiously and with awareness, and how to sneak and creep and stalk and then kind of get into the philosophical, emotional journey of all of this. So that's what we have honed over the last 10 years and put together into a 4 to 5 day course for small groups of people that are either totally new to hunting or maybe have a little bit of experience but are still sort of trying to put the pieces together to to walk through this process, just come out, park the car. We're going to be on the land and we're going to dive into this stuff and sit around the campfire at night and philosophize about what it means to be a meat eater or not. And, a hunter and a human, and ask questions about what does this caliber mean? And, what is the ballistic chart, and why do I need this kind of a knife? And, what kind of a pack do I need? And there's all these little things. And, you can probably read about it in books and watch YouTubes until the cows come home. But this is a course for people that like to get, their hands dirty. And that's what we do. You put your hands inside of an animal and you gut a sheep or a goat, which we then eat, that our chef prepares for you. So you get a chance to eat the animal you worked on, organs, different cuts, everything, and just be part of the whole thing. So I think some people, they come to this course and, they have their intention is to learn how to hunt and get out there and hunt, and they do. And we've received a lot of stories of people who've gone on and had really great hunts. And other people are just curious about what this realm is and if it's something that resonates with them. And just having gone through the course experience, it was very similar to a hunt. And they, from what they've shared, can be very life-changing for them, even if they don't go on to hunt right away in the, after the course.
Yeah. Well, I think it's incredibly immersive. I mean, the hands-on experience is key, and the fact that you're learning these skills the right way early on is key, with that underlying degree of just respect and, the mental and emotional outlook that one would need to have to be the best hunter they can be from the onset is very important. Because like, people can start hunting with bad advice, with bad gear, with bad habits, and then it's very hard to break those over time. Whereas if you lay that fundamental groundwork on the front end and they build from that, it totally changes their trajectory.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, some of the stories people have shared with us is just from the fact of getting these, this foundation set, a good solid foundation has launched them into activities that they never would have imagined doing before. And in doing so, they meet people doing those, getting out and doing hunts that become good friends. And one guy recently, he was a clothing designer from California that came up for the course. And he wrote in a letter, due to his experience with the course and the fact that he started hunting, in a similar fashion to what we promote, he met some people, ended up getting a job offer in Missoula, Montana, and moved to Montana where he could hunt more. And I mean, who knows? Didn't know there was a big clothing fashion design in Missoula, but he called up the company and had an interview. And he said for the first hour, all he talked about was hunting. They never even got to the job, but he knew at that point it was probably a good sign. So just an example of just the little things, starting this journey, it can unlock doors and different way of life that we may never have realized or we've forgotten because, it's just the way the modern world has swept us up. And I like to think that it's not about learning to be a hunter, it's remembering to be a hunter. Because I feel like it's really still embedded within us. It's not that long ago that we were doing this, all of us, and we're here today because our ancestors were successful hunters. So it's more about, reawakening that part of us.
Well, that awakening most definitely transcends the act of hunting itself. I mean, I think you and I originally got connected because one of the people that I've been corresponding with via email for years regarding, health and nutrition had gone through your course, and it was transformative for her. And then she emailed me, detailing how it totally changed her life and her outlook. And then that's what prompted me to get you on the podcast initially. And then, just talking with her after that, years later, she constantly refers to that experience as being transformative on so many different levels, so far beyond the actual act of hunting. The respect you gain and just the outlook you go forward with transcends the sport and bleeds into every area of your life. So yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And now here you and I are again doing another podcast and continuing the conversation, hosting a retreat in a few months. I mean, you just build bonds and relationships that you wouldn't be able to do, via a Zoom conversation or a email. I mean, when you're doing hard things that invoke this deeper appreciation for life alongside other people, that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned this gal. I mean, I think we're about a third of our participants are women, which is great. I think hunting has been predominantly a white, male, European descent kind of sport for a long time, and I do think more women are getting into it, and we try to be as open as we can in presenting this, and I think that's why we get a pretty good population of good numbers of women joining us. My wife was a vegetarian for 12 years before we met. I'm a Vipassana meditator, and she's very spiritual, and there was some questionable time when we first met, like, where is this going to go, and but I explained to her. I mean, I didn't really explain that much. I was just who I was, and I think it became pretty evident pretty clearly that there was a lot more to hunting than a lot of people think when they don't have the experience with it. And she recalls a story of a guy that joined us years ago and it wrote something on our, wrote a review, and he considers himself a very spiritual yogi and travels around the world and volunteers at different events and working with spiritual leaders. And he said that he felt that I was the most spiritual person that he'd ever met. So that, I think, was a selling point for my wife to kind of think, well, what's going on here? I mean, hunting, spirituality, but there's just, like we talked about before, a lot of it is reconnecting to the roots of who we are and how we're connected to this bigger picture of nature and the ecosystem. And so,
yeah,
she's I keep encouraging her to write the book, Why I Married a Hunter.
That would be a good one. I would read it for sure. And I feel like a lot of people, you mentioned that she was vegan, prior. I mean, I feel like I can totally relate and appreciate a lot of the motives that people have to go vegan. I mean, they want to respect the animal. They want to protect the earth. They want to, be mindful of all that. But again, kind of going back to what we were alluding to in the beginning, it's like if you take this outlook towards hunting, all of that comes by default. Like, you want to preserve the habitat, you want to do right by the animal, you connect on that more spiritual level. So yeah, I think it checks so many of the boxes, and it just happens by default because it's in that primitive state. Like, it just takes the noise out of the equation.
Yeah.
So it's great. We love it. So what's got you excited coming up here? Lots of big things planned for 2025.
Yeah, we're our spring seasons are a big season for teaching. We're going to run a series of courses, kicking off the season with you. Or we'll get into some of our shell fishing stuff prior to that in March, and we have our annual kind of get together and wild game tasting, typically in Seattle, which is usually a good way to get some people out of the woodworks that are a little bit curious, and then they taste some wild elk prepared by one of our chefs and start to think, oh, there's something more to this. But yeah, spring is our busy season, and there's a lot of work that leads up into it. But it's really why I do this, is to work with people in person, one-on-one in small groups, and have those bonding experiences and creating a community, like we said, just sitting around a fire like we've been doing for eons and learning these hard skills and kind of going through a bit of a rite of passage. And all the planning and prep that goes into it, I'm reminded when I start working with these folks that why it's worth it.
Yeah. The camaraderie there, and just seeing people learn and develop, and seeing them connect the dots and get excited is incredibly rewarding. I'm super stoked to do that retreat with you in April, and just kind of see who's there and offer any help that I possibly can. But just see people, have that rite of passage firsthand. I think that is incredibly fulfilling. Like when I've taken people hunting and walked them through, harvesting their first animal, and then teach them how to butcher, and then how to, then prepare it and eat it. I mean, when you eat something that was walking, a few hours earlier, like there's just another switch that gets flipped in your brain, and you just have this whole newfound appreciation for everything once that happens. So I'm super excited for April.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to it too. It's going to be, really a new step in this process in terms of combining the hunting with fitness and nutrition on your end, to kind of create a even broader picture of what to do and how to get prepared. This is still going to be the majority of our Awaken the Hunter course, shooting bows, rifles, tracking, scouting, field dressing, skinning stuff. And then on top of that, you're going to bring expertise on, what we talked about earlier in terms of planning physically and tuning up our body for these hunts, not only for the hunt, but for life. And I look at hunting as a way of life. So it's not like it's just one short season every year. It's just sort of who I am and runs through me. And so, I think thinking like a hunter and training like a hunter can happen year round. And, the expertise and knowledge you bring to the experience, I think will be very valuable in kind of wrapping this up into a more cohesive picture and package.
Well, I look at, what I think of hunting, what all I've learned in nutrition and fitness and health over the past 20 years of my life. I mean, especially since I've gone the route of being ketogenic, like it makes sense to source the highest quality, most nutrient dense animal fats and proteins I can possibly procure, which then paves the way for me wanting to get into hunting, because that is the premier quality nutrition right there. And then you connect that and it becomes full circle with, being more closely tied to the meat that you are consuming and being part of the environment as a whole. Like everything's very cohesive. Like when you want to take care of yourself to your best ability, you want to source the best food you can. You want to be respectful towards that animal. And if you're, like we said earlier, healthier, more fit, you can be a better hunter. And if you're doing it alongside people that share a similar mentality and approach towards it, everybody wins. So I'm very excited to offer what I can from a nutrition and fitness training standpoint. I'm super excited to learn from you as a professional hunter, because I'm sure I've got all kinds of bad habits with regards to hunting that I've acquired over the years. So you could probably break me of some of those for sure.
Yeah, you might be my toughest case study.
Yeah, I might be. I might be. But I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, this will be my second retreat, first one in collaboration with you. But I think we could certainly bridge the gap and just provide an amazing experience. So I'm genuinely incredibly excited for it.
Tell me again some of the things you're wanting to focus on during the retreat in terms of fitness and nutrition.
Yeah, so from a nutrition standpoint, like I basically, since we're going to keep these at a smaller group setting, it's great because we can go more intimate, we can dive deeper into things. Whereas like most conferences that I'm speaking at, it's just way too many people to take an individualized approach. So with this, like I'll be able to sit around a campfire, actually analyze every individual as an individual, figure out where they've come from, what their nutritional goals and body composition goals are, what macronutrient profile and caloric allotment they should have a day to reach those goals, provide a pretty clear path as to how to reach that goal successfully to make it sustainable. And then we'll bring in this training component using, relatively primitive tools that we have there, things that are applicable in day-to-day life with movement, splitting firewood, moving logs, hiking for mountain, miles up in the mountains, like all this stuff intertwined within the scope and the framework and the environment of hunting and being outside in nature. I think it's going to be a good native fit for sure.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to learning from you too, because I feel like I've just sort of bootstrapped it and I've forced it over the years. As a result, I think I have pretty good mental toughness, which counts for a lot. And I don't think I've reached my optimum like RPMs in the boiler room in terms of my, how my body is operating and the foods I'm eating. And so there's a whole spectrum there too. And, I looking forward to learning from someone who lives, breathes, and eats this on a daily basis, and how to break it down and make, kind of bite-sized pieces and make sense of it that it can then be applied to the rest of life.
Yeah. Well, I think, like if we look at the technical component of, quality fats and proteins, wild game is nutritionally superior. And if you're not having the noise of the equation brought in by processed foods and sugars, none of which would be native to a primitive state outdoors anyways, it really is just a match made in heaven. I feel like, a ketogenic, well-formulated ketogenic diet coupled with being self-sufficient and familiar with the outdoors and how to procure your own food, harvest that food, butcher that food, prepare that food, and eat that food. It just goes hand in hand perfectly. So we both have a lot to add value-wise. I feel like the people that are there are going to be able to take something from it, very actionable steps going forward, and we'll be able to take what they learned and move forward in life with more confidence. So I think it's going to be great. I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too.
And the dates for this, we finally put pen to paper, got everything finalized. We're looking at April 9th through was it 13th or 14th, whatever that Sunday is, right?
Yes. Yeah, whatever that is. That sounds right on. It's about 5 days, 4 nights.
Yeah.
Easy to fly into Spokane and hop up. We're in the Kettle Falls area, Northeast Washington, in the Selkirk Mountains and the foothills of the Rockies. And it's pretty steep terrain around here, and a lot of evergreens, fir and pine, and some Tampa larch. We've got deer and elk. We've got a lot of black bear and cougar and wolves, more wolves showing up. I just saw some fresh tracks in the snow the other day on a hike. Smaller bobcat type predators in here. I saw a kill site just down in the woods here yesterday where a hare had been killed and eaten. So there's a lot going on. Turkey, wild turkeys and grouse. So it's a neat area. It's off the beaten path. You get in here, you can't see into their houses or it feels like you're out in the wild more so. But we do have a little homestead here and some basic amenities. And part of this is not inviting people out to a lavish lodge experience per se, but we do, like I say, work with a chef, try to make really good meals. But then we'll eat in a wall tent with a wood stove to kind of, there's some elements of toughening us up as well, and sleeping on the ground in tents, or we have some small cabins if people want to upgrade to that option. But, and I think that people ultimately wanting this experience actually want the broader experience. They don't necessarily, they're not looking for a 5-star hotel experience, but a little bit more of a backcountry-esque get together.
Yeah, I think that is almost, you don't have to have that to truly connect, but I think once you strip away all of the cozy fluff that society has brought in by default, you're able to much more readily connect with that primitive state. So I think by not having that 5-star luxury resort, it makes it that much easier for the end goal to be achieved. So I think it's perfect. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, it'll be that week in April. It'll be at your location there in Kettle Falls. And I used to live in Spokane, so I love Washington. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. I'm excited to go back there and see it. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this through and through. And I haven't decided if I'm going to drive or fly yet. If I drive, I can bring a lot more gear. So I don't know. I'm on the fence on that, but I'm looking forward to being there for sure.
Yeah, you bet.
And people can, if they're interested in this, want to see if it's a good fit for them. We've got your website, and that's tons of photos from prior Awaken the Hunter courses, video footage there. I'm building out a landing page on my site as well. We'll put all these links in the show notes. But for people that want to dive deeper into you, your story, your platform, where would they go to learn more about you, Bruce?
Oh, probably our website is the best place to start, humannaturehunting.com. We've got some social media accounts, but just based on the technical challenges of getting this podcast rolling, you know how much I love technology. So, we're not dumping a lot of effort into the social media, but we try to get a lot of detail on the website. And as I mentioned earlier, we have this alum and a friend of mine who started filming and has the filming background and has kind of revived our YouTube channel. And he's put a lot of stuff up there in the last couple of months and will continue to do so, including a couple of Montana hunts this past fall. So we'll try to get a few of those links in there as well.
Awesome. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing the Montana hunt footage. And we'll probably take some footage at this retreat there as well, but I'll put all of your links in the show notes here, make it easy for people to find you. And if anybody is interested in hunting or wants to pursue that, highly recommend y'all check this out because it's going to be good. It's going to be informative. It's going to be educational. It's going to be a good connection with people. And I feel like that's what we as a society crave more of. Like, we have all this technology, which is great. I mean, you and I are able to record a podcast right now. You're in Washington, I'm in Arkansas. But there's something that cannot be achieved unless you are standing alongside somebody, ideally across the campfire, sharing a steak or something like that. So I'm looking forward to having that intimate connection. So yeah, it'll be good, man.
And it reminds me of, backcountry elk camp setup. I've said this many times, like what I really appreciate about being back there, and it's changing now with the satellite communication. But, up until a couple of years ago, there was zero cell phone reception. I didn't even have any satellite communication when we went back there. And there was this huge comfort knowing that if somebody wanted to talk to me, they were going to have to get within shouting distance and actually talk to me. Mm-hmm. There wasn't this pile up of emails and notifications waiting. And that's just let that go. And it feels so good. It obviously has some challenges, but nothing we haven't gotten through in the past. But I think there's a lot more benefit to it than just kind of having an electron detox like that and having that connection. And I think community is a big part of it too. We had a guy that did a lot of solo backpacking join us some years ago for a course. And after the course, he went out and did a solo hunt. Like, he'd been doing backpacking trips for years. And he said there was something very odd about being out there hunting alone. He felt lonely and it just felt off. Even though he'd done a number of solo backpack trips alone and never had a problem. And then we put together an alumni hunt that fall, and he joined us for that and kind of did, what we do at a course, sit around a campfire, share stories, and ask questions. And he said that made all the difference. I mean, just being part of a small group, kind of a tribe or a clan, that having that community, being part of that community kind of tapped into that primalness. And looking back, it feels like that is the essence of who we always have been as humans, living in small villages and having a deep connection to our land, hunting and gathering. So it kind of gets back to the basics.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly enjoyed the solo hunts I've done, but there's something to be said when you can share an experience that's transformative with somebody else that's also experiencing something similar, especially if it's hard. Like when you're backcountry hunting and you're putting in miles and you're burning calories and breaking a sweat and putting in long hours, like being able to share that physical exhaustion with somebody else. I mean, there's a lot of benefit to that too.
Yeah, misery likes company.
That's what they say. Well, Bruce, I am super excited for our retreat. I'm super excited for all that you're doing for the hunting community. I'm grateful to know you've got tremendous respect for you as a person. And yeah, I'm really stoked about this. So I appreciate the opportunity to go in on this with you. And I just encourage anybody that's interested to definitely check this out and dive deeper.
Thank you, Robert. The feeling's mutual. Looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. For too long, we'll be seeing each other in person.